Your nose is coming out of your eye hole.
It began with a bang. Loud, brash, and impossible to ignore. 2. Broke Girls burst onto CBS's primetime stage with sharp one-liners, a recession-era premise, and the kind of buzz most sitcoms can only dream of. But somewhere between a cupcake dream and a diner full of stereotypes, the laughter started to fade. What happened behind the scenes? And why did a show that drew millions suddenly vanish without a goodbye? The answer isn't as simple as low ratings or critical backlash. In fact, one often ignored factor may have played a far greater role than anyone expected. Curious yet? You should be. A promising start. When Two Broke Girls premiered in the fall of 2011, it quickly carved out a prominent place in CBS's comedy lineup. The series was the result of a collaboration between Whitney Cummings, a rising stand-up comic known for her sharp and unapologetic humor, and Michael Patrick King, the seasoned Sex and the City showrunner. Their pitch, a sitcom that explored the lives of two financially struggling women from opposite backgrounds, resonated with the network, especially during an era when many young adults were still grappling with the aftermath of the 2008 recession. The show's timely premise, coupled with the unique voices behind it, gave CBS confidence that it had another hit on its hands. That confidence paid off early. The pilot episode drew over 19 million viewers, making it one of the most watched sitcom launches of the season. Audience response was largely positive, driven by the chemistry between stars Kat Dennings and Beth Behrs. Dennings, portraying the street-smart, jaded Max, and Behrs as the former rich girl-turned-waitress Caroline, offered a dynamic that felt fresh to many viewers. Their odd couple friendship, full of biting sarcasm, cultural contrasts, and a shared hustle, quickly became the emotional core of the series. Viewers found their banter both funny and unexpectedly heartwarming. A good deal of explanation might be entertained from the show's choosing the gag style that it did. 2. Broke Girls was uncompromising when it came to vulgar language, edgy topics, and a fast-timed punchline delivery combination rarely and never dotted in casual sitcoms back then. It attempted to bring something of the stand-up comedy feel into the traditional multi-camera setup, usually bearing loads of rude jokes and pop culture allusions. Maybe that gave it an identity of a youngster urban flavor type of show. Most foreign is a must-stay well, with television rating among the studied. The Cupcake Shop storyline added a bit of fantastical relatability as a symbolic representation of millennial ambition on a backdrop of economic hardship. But while the reception was fairly enthusiastic, it begs to be asked, how much of that momentum in the early days was merely riding on the novelty factor? CBS appeared truly anxious to have Two Broke Girls hold its title as the anchor of the Monday night schedule. They even switched around the show's time slots to get a boost for the new shows. The confidence at that early stage speaks to the network's attraction to the idea of the show's long-term potential. But how do some critics see it in retrospect? That early popularity might have obscured its structural weaknesses that came more sharply into focus post its initial success. On a long-term basis, did the show's style and tone hold? Or was it just a very clever concept, with show wizard leads that was simply gliding on the wave? Yet behind the laugh track and booming debut, an early fault line was already starting to show, critically mixed from the beginning. From the moment Two Broke Girls hit the airwaves, the response from critics was sharply divided. While some acknowledged its potential, a fresh premise centered on female friendship and economic hardship, others were quick to criticize the execution. Outlets like The Hollywood Reporter and Vulture called out the show for relying on cheap, predictable jokes and questioned its excessively snarky tone. For a show that had been so highly anticipated, the critical reception landed with an uneasy thud. What began as an innovative concept was, in some reviewers' eyes, quickly diminished by writing that lacked depth or originality. One of the earliest signs of trouble came during the 2012 Television Critics Association press tour. The show's cast and creators were confronted with uncomfortable questions about the writing, particularly regarding the supporting characters and the pervasive use of innuendos. Some journalists directly challenged whether the humor was pushing boundaries or simply resorting to lazy shock value. While co-creator Michael Patrick King defended the show's edginess, suggesting it came from a place of wit and inclusivity, not everyone was convinced. Even by the end of Season 1, many critics believed the show was already leaning too hard on its most provocative elements. It is worth mentioning that not all reviewers dismissed the show outright. Some critics, like those writing for Slate, gave a modicum of praise, calling the show regularly palatable, with the ability to raise a cheap chuckle. These mild endorsements often praised the lead performances, but fretted about the show rarely allowing its humor to go past surface-level punchlines. Such split critical reactions created a weird dynamic. Two Broke Girls was a firm audience favorite, but absent the critical goodwill that often propels shows through creative slumps or shifting network priorities. That, of course, leaves the question, given the split in response, whether any early backlash played a role in the show's long-term direction, or whether the creative side, in fact, went the opposite way, working harder to deepen an initial hue of disagreement that was already dividing audiences. As time passed, the show's unashamedly brash tone never found itself mellowed by anybody's mercy. And whether this was purely out of choice or a misjudged chance for advancement remains a bit of a discussion. Either way, gathering very little early critical support made it harder to survive growing scrutiny in the following years, which was one of the ultimate cracks forming in what looked like a solid gold opening for the show. Offensive stereotypes. One of the most persistent and damaging criticisms aimed at Two Broke Girls throughout its run was the use of racial and ethnic stereotypes, particularly in its portrayal of supporting characters. Han Lee, the Korean-American diner owner played by Matthew Moy, was frequently reduced to a caricature. Short, awkward, overly eager to assimilate, and constantly the target of jokes about his accent or cultural differences. Similarly, Oleg, the Ukrainian cook, was portrayed as a hypersexualized immigrant who routinely made inappropriate comments. Critics argued that these characters were not developed with nuance, but instead relied on tired, outdated tropes that positioned them as punchlines rather than people. The backlash wasn't limited to opinion columns. It reached major press events. During a 2012 Television Critics Association panel, reporters grilled the show's creators over its depictions of race and culture. Co-creator Michael Patrick King defended the characters as intentionally exaggerated and claimed that the show was an equal opportunity offender. King suggested that all sitcom characters begin as stereotypes before gaining complexity over time. Yet, as the seasons wore on, many viewers and critics questioned whether that growth ever truly happened. Were these characters ever allowed to evolve, or did the show continue to rely on their one-note portrayals for easy laughs? A couple of cast members had tried to explain the controversy. Matthew Moy himself accepted that there was some discomfort with Han's character while nevertheless defending it, saying that the show came from a place of love and was never meant to be hurtful. Beth Bears, who plays Caroline, shared the said sentiment during an Entertainment Weekly interview. people are always going to find something to set their eyes on to criticize. This little defense did nothing to assuage the worries of critics and viewers who felt the show was possibly a missed opportunity to showcase the diverse talent of the cast. The ever-increasing weight of the criticism possibly made the show feel increasingly more out of touch, especially as inclusion and representation in media hit the mainstream scene. One thing that indeed was never decided upon was whether the producers ever seriously entertained the notion of making some adaptations or reimaginings of these roles in light of the backlash. By going with these caricatures season after season, the show was at risk of alienating not only critics, but this broad swath of viewers looking for a little sincerity and representation. Could the show have kept its biting humor, at least somewhat, and replaced these supporting cast members with fuller, more grounded characters? It's a question that's still lingering almost as much, if not even more, when looking back on why Two Broke Girls never managed to keep its initial burst of success in a time when viewers started pressing hard for more honesty and culture-conscious entertainment. Raunchy humor in the wrong time slot. While Two Broke Girls built its identity around being edgy and unfiltered, many critics and viewers questioned whether its humor was simply too raunchy for prime time. The show frequently leaned into sexual innuendos and crude double entendres, often using these punchlines as the foundation for entire scenes or character dynamics. Oleg's over-the-top sexual comments, Max's innuendo-laced one-liners, and an overall reliance on risque humor gave the show its distinct voice, but also made it a polarizing fixture on CBS's lineup, which traditionally catered to a more family-friendly audience during the 8-10 p.m. block. By 2017, The Washington Post went as far as calling it the filthiest show on network television. The tone and content led to formal complaints from viewers, with the Federal Communications Commission, FCC, logging dozens of grievances over the years. According to Adweek, complaints ranged from disapproval over explicit language to outrage over the sexual nature of jokes being aired during so-called family hours. While not all complaints necessarily affected the show's fate, they reflected growing discomfort among segments of the audience and suggested that the show's content may have been misaligned with the time slot CBS had chosen for it. Co-creator Michael Patrick King and others defended the tone as being intentional and a reflection of the comedic sensibility of the creators. In particular, King viewed the humor as bold rather than crude, maintaining that the aim of the show was truly to make everybody laugh, regardless of whether it veered close to being in bad taste. But, surely, as television standards evolved, and as an opinionated audience rose up to demand what content is worthy or not worthy of airing on a commercial network, would CBS have felt greater pressure to reevaluate how programs such as Two Broke Girls would fit into the broader brand strategy? Did the risk of going against an angry public with wary advertisers ultimately outweigh the reward of provocative comedy? Looking back, for some, this might be a question to ponder. Would more fitting venues for this kind of humor have been on the cable or streaming platforms, which are known for bestowing the creators with much freedom from the hindrances of broadcast standards? Comedies that have a strong voice are not uncommon to romp around and thrive on such platforms. Was Two Broke Girls similarly ahead of its time, or was it merely incompatible with the airing platform? Regardless, the tone of the show became one of the primary and most divisive features, which likely prevented the show from gaining anything close to mainstream appeal outside its core audience. Creative stagnation and recycled storylines. As Two Broke Girls progressed through its 6-season run, one of the most commonly cited criticisms was its increasing reliance on repetitive storytelling, particularly surrounding the cupcake business subplot. What started as a clever and somewhat aspirational narrative thread, two broke waitresses chasing the American dream by launching a cupcake company, quickly became formulaic. Despite minor developments, the central premise of trying and failing to get their business off the ground rarely evolved in a meaningful way. For many viewers, it began to feel like the characters were running in place, with few real consequences or lasting growth. This stagnation extended beyond the plot and into the characters themselves. Max and Caroline, once dynamic opposites navigating an unexpected friendship, started to fall into predictable patterns. Max's sarcastic jabs and Caroline's entitled optimism became more exaggerated over time, but not necessarily deeper. Critics and fans alike noted the lack of meaningful character development, pointing out that both women seemed stuck in the same roles season after season. Rather than evolve with new experiences, they often reset to familiar behavior, making the emotional arcs feel hollow. While not necessarily a prerequisite for a sitcom to work, the feeling of enjoying something fresh is indeed important. By the late series, Two Broke Girls was recycling jokes, rehashing plot points, and simply repeating beats that had once felt so fresh and irreverent. Side characters like Sophie and Oleg were repeat offenders for the same sort of gags, while the show's locations, the diner and the apartment, did not really change much. Without new locations, new dynamics, or real stakes, the sitcom simply started to lose momentum. And in a show that started with so much vibrant energy and chemistry, that creative inertia was sounding louder than ever. Could it have been further revitalized by some ambitious storytelling or a deeper arc for its protagonists? Perhaps. But it is questionable whether the writing team was willing, or maybe even able, to depart from the formula that had originally brought them success. While other comedies around the same time evolved with serial storytelling, relationships with layers, and social commentary, Two Broke Girls seemed pretty complacent about easy cruising on the strength of the original idea. That glistening veneer of being edgy and fresh started to wear off, and in turn left longtime viewers with a sense of lost opportunity to grow alongside an advantageous audience. And once the story stopped evolving, the audience's patience began to do the same. Declining viewership and ratings slide. When Two Broke Girls premiered in 2011, it was a ratings powerhouse. The series launched to over 19.37 million viewers, immediately positioning itself as one of CBS's strongest comedies. For several seasons, the show maintained a solid audience, consistently ranking among the top sitcoms on network television. However, as the seasons progressed, the numbers began to tell a different story. By its sixth and final season, the show's viewership had dwindled to just over 4.5 million for the season finale, still respectable by some standards, but a significant drop from its debut. This gradual erosion in audience size wasn't entirely unique to Two Broke Girls. The television landscape was changing rapidly, with many long-running network shows facing similar declines as audiences shifted to streaming platforms. What made Two Broke Girls stand out, however, was that its declining ratings coincided with increasing criticism about the show's creative direction, humor, and cultural insensitivity. Even though CBS renewed other shows with comparable ratings, such as Man with a Plan and Life in Pieces, those series may have better aligned with the network's evolving brand and viewer expectations. While it might have been the subject of comparisons to its then-contemporary sitcoms, there certainly was a drop in viewership during its run. In its sixth season, nearly 2 million viewers just walked away. And so goes the drop in viewership for the demo ratings as well. Especially, the rating slump hit the precious 18 to 49-year range pretty hard. They could maintain a loyal fan base for a short while, but that was not enough by itself, not to give rise to a concern for diminishing returns in ratings or audience enthusiasm. The latest trends put even more pressure on CBS for being able to make a case for keeping it on the schedule, especially now that newer shows were competing for the prized spots in prime time. Was the cancellation just about numbers? Probably not. But certainly, those numbers made the choice that much easier to make. And so, while pure ratings are not what may have smashed Two Broke Girls, that constant decline certainly helped tip the scales. This, coupled with other backstage landmines, ownership disputes, creative exhaustion, did not make it any easier for CBS to argue their case for keeping the show in production when fresher and more promising material was at hand. So at the very least, the numbers were not so catastrophic that they could reverse the downward spiral that the show had begun upon. Behind the scenes, financial disputes. One of the most critical but often overlooked factors behind the cancellation of Two Broke Girls was a behind-the-scenes financial standoff between CBS and Warner Bros. Television. Although CBS aired the show, it did not own it, a significant detail in the economics of modern television. Warner Bros. Produced the series and retained the syndication rights, which became a major issue once the show secured a lucrative deal with TBS, reportedly worth $1.7 million per episode. This meant that while Two Broke Girls was profitable overall, CBS didn't benefit from the substantial back-end revenue, leaving the network less financially motivated to keep it on the air. The lack of financial ownership put CBS in a complicated position. Despite respectable ratings compared to some of its peers, the network had to weigh the benefit of continuing to air a show that enriched another studio more than itself. In a time when networks were increasingly focused on owning or co-owning their content to maximize profits from syndication, streaming rights, and international sales, Two Broke Girls became less attractive from a business standpoint. The value proposition simply wasn't there in the long term, especially as CBS aimed to invest in properties it could fully monetize. It turns out, this dynamic wasn't peculiar to Two Broke Girls. CBS had exhibited a preference for shows it either controlled outright or that were co-produced with its house studios. Known at the time, the majority of new comedies in development at CBS were actually controlled by the network itself, thus giving the network more skin in future syndication deals. That larger paradigm, though, of considering shows like Two Broke Girls expendable, regardless of how well they continued to do in viewership, kept them from even being given a chance. Would the show, then, have survived longer if CBS produced it? This, of course, is a fair question, especially concerning the fact that some lesser-rated shows were indeed renewed. It all came down to economics behind the scenes, which were at least as important as, or more important than, creative opinions or critical acclaim of the show. While in the media, some of the talk centered on the ratings of the show and the implicit controversies. However, according to insiders in the industry, the problem was really these unresolved issues regarding licensing and ownership. It would probably ever have made no difference if viewers had been given the redemption of creative reinvention or ratings insurance. The fate would have been sealed once CBS put its choice into investing in the prospects of future profit, or continuing to air a series that benefited a rival studio. Therefore, the show falls victim to corporate economics just as much as it did to being content-fatigued. The changing landscape of TV comedy. As Two Broke Girls entered its later seasons, it began to feel increasingly out of step with the rapidly evolving television landscape. The rise of streaming platforms like Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon Prime ushered in a new golden age of television, offering viewers serialized, character-driven comedies with more emotional depth and cultural relevance. Shows such as Master of None, Insecure, and Fleabag were pushing the boundaries of what comedic storytelling could be, balancing humor with social commentary and personal introspection. In contrast, Two Broke Girls clung to a traditional multi-camera format and a joke-heavy approach that had started to feel dated in comparison. The difference wasn't just in format, but in tone and sensibility. Audiences were gravitating toward content that reflected more diverse experiences, and they increasingly expected representation to be handled with nuance and respect. Two Broke Girls, with its reliance on ethnic stereotypes and raunchy humor, began to feel like a relic of a different era. Its fast-paced banter and one-liners once seemed edgy and brash, but eventually came across as formulaic, in an industry now valuing more layered character work and storytelling arcs. In this new context, the show's refusal to evolve became a liability. Meanwhile, streaming also allowed creators to take creative risks and tell stories more unconventionally, free from the restrictions of network censors and the necessity of strict episode structures. That freedom meant the service got to broadcast fresher, more out-of-the-box shows aimed at niche audiences, but received widespread critical acclaim. Whereas Two Broke Girls represented the rare network sitcom anyway, trying to be popular while also being a little bit rebellious, and such a difficult balance now. The humor that was once bold now felt fenced in by the very structures it sought to undermine. Could it have gone on longer if in a different format, or on a different platform? That still remains a conflict of thoughts. In the end, perhaps it was Two Broke Girls that got trapped in that generational shift in comedy. The viewers were in a flux of choice, shifting to credibility away from shock values and gravitating towards complexity away from caricature. Initially, the show did speak to them, down-and-out situations, and female bonding, but couldn't grow with the population it spoke to, nor adjust to changes happening elsewhere in the business. That is to suggest that it may not have been just competition from other comedies that sent Two Broke Girls into obsolescence. Rather, it was television itself evolving, carving out the increasing irrelevance of the show. The network's creative justification. When CBS officially canceled Two Broke Girls in May 2017, the network offered a relatively standard explanation. The show had simply run its course. This phrase, often used as a diplomatic way to frame a creative decision, suggested that 6 seasons was a natural stopping point. Network executives noted that the series had enjoyed a successful run and that the time had come to make space for new programming. On the surface, this explanation aligned with the typical churn of network television, where long-running shows often bow out to usher in fresh content. But for many observers, the rationale felt overly tidy, especially for a series that still drew millions of viewers weekly. The timing and phrasing of CBS's statement sparked speculation about what wasn't being said. For one, the announcement came after prolonged negotiations between CBS and Warner Bros. Television, the studio that produced the series. Industry insiders pointed out that these talks had dragged on unusually long, raising questions about whether financial or strategic disagreements played a bigger role than publicly acknowledged. Given that Two Broke Girls was still outperforming several other comedies on the network, the idea that it was canceled purely for creative reasons seemed overly simplistic to some media analysts. Claiming that the show had simply run its natural course gave CBS a way to sidestep an uglier conversation about the rising criticism against the series, from tired humor and stereotypical characters to its dwindling relevance in an industry racing along an evolving comedic path. CBS, however, choosing not to engage with the wider industry and cultural shift decided on a carefully worded exit that implied a closure on a creative level. That was yet another problem. Nothing was in those final episodes to suggest that either the writers or the cast had been preparing for an absolute end, compounding the feeling that something went unsaid. Was the run its course thought a deft deflection of more complex internal dynamics? The fact is, perhaps, with the ratings falling off without any ownership in it and more voices being raised against its content, Two Broke Girls had become less of a convenient asset to CBS. But the network, of course, upon officially announcing its demise, chose instead to align with the all-too-familiar, non-disputed cliché. Doing this ended up hiding the deeper-set issues that attacked not merely the demise of a sitcom, but the death knell of classic, tried-and-true TV comedy in a shifting entertainment world. But beyond the polished press release, the show's exit took a sharp turn, one that blindsided not just viewers, but the cast themselves. An abrupt ending without closure. When Two Broke Girls was canceled in 2017, the news came with no warning, either to fans or to the cast. The decision, announced shortly before CBS unveiled its fall schedule, left many stunned. Unlike shows that are gradually written toward a conclusion, Two Broke Girls was abruptly cut off without a series finale or any attempt to wrap up key storylines. Viewers were left hanging with numerous unresolved arcs, including Max's budding relationship and Caroline's uncertain future. For a show that had spent 6 years developing its characters' struggles and ambitions, the sudden halt felt jarring and unsatisfying. Kat Dennings, who played Max, publicly expressed disappointment at the way things ended. In interviews following the cancellation, she acknowledged how deeply she and the rest of the cast had hoped to return for at least one more season, or a proper wrap-up. Beth Bears shared similar sentiments, emphasizing how grateful they were for the show's run, but also hinting at the emotional difficulty of not saying goodbye on their own terms. Their reactions mirrored that of the audience, many of whom had invested in the show's characters despite the criticism it received over the years. In lieu of all things sudden, individual information was withheld from the public for days, thereby only adding to its abruptness. Neither CBS nor Warner Brothers would break from the usual kind of PR speak that is so commonly uttered in matters of publicity. The rumors went about claiming that some last-minute talks between the network and studio might have fallen apart, either due to conflicts over licensing or scheduling, but we never really got to hear any tangible reasons confirmed by those who knew. Did someone try to arrange a 7th season, or at the very least, a series-ending movie in the very last moment? Unsure. It became a pretty clear-cut case of Reason 1. The creative team was left in shambles. Reason 2. The fans, too. In hindsight, the show's abrupt and unceremonious closure lays bare a hubristic truth about broadcast TV. Even series with some degree of success can have their doors shut if rivalry or studios deem it drags their strategic or financial goals crosswise. Far from offering the show closure, which irked its most faithful fans, this thus sets a minus against its legacy, thus matter that. For all its shortcomings, it had developed a loyal fandom and did great things for CBS in its formative days. The absence of closure gave a business smell to the wrapping up, rather than the creative end of a formerly promising story that it truly should have been. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel out. Got thoughts, theories, or favorite moments? Drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you're into deep dives like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an episode. Still curious about how other sitcoms wrapped things up or completely avoided closure? Click on the next video on your screen and let's keep the binge going. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.